We have, as a firm, we've had this thesis for about 2 years, and we have looked at dozens of companies trying to solve this. We could not get there on any up until prior because majority of them were so narrow in scope and felt more like a point solution that latched onto something that had this exact problem of scalability. So because Priya was started within Providence, one of the top 10 systems out there in terms of patient volume, like they had an inherent advantage in being able to do this in the right scalable way from day one, which I think is very difficult for others to replicate.
New choices, new players, new models of care. You know consumer first healthcare is everywhere. For us to build the future, to see what's new, we gotta look at the world from a different point of view. Consumer innovation ain't going away. I say it's here to stay. Today it leads the way. We gotta drop the silos. We're all the same team. Experience, business, tech, and marketing. So join us now. Join the revolution. Consumer first health is the evolution. Status quo or like status no. Yeah, this is the healthcare rap. Yo, come on, let's go.
Welcome back to the leading podcast for consumer experience champions in healthcare. This is episode 337. I'm Jared Johnson, and here's what's going to go down today. We have the Flava of the week about Accenture's recent report on patient loyalty. How does their latest research strengthen the business case for digital engagement? And why should we get better at explaining its value? I'll talk about that. Then we welcome YY from SignalFire to talk about what the health tech landscape looks like from the venture world these days, including the current and future roadmap for using tech to improve legacy consumer experiences. It's time to dive right in. Are you ready? Let's go.
Flava of the week.
Accenture's recent report on patient loyalty helps us build the business case for digital engagement. At some point, a majority of conversations about digital engagement turn to value. As usual, it depends on who's asking. When marketing leaders ask the question, they tend to ask how many more new patients and services they can attribute. When innovation leaders ask, they want to know the value of transforming their care models and experiences. And interestingly, when experience leaders ask, they typically want to measure the impact on loyalty and retention, which is why Accenture's recent report was interesting to me. It was titled The Power of Trust: Unlocking Patient Loyalty in Healthcare, and it included the results of surveying nearly 18,000 consumers in the U.S. who use provider and payer services. The key finding was that loyalty is powered by 4 things: access, ease of doing business, digital engagement, and trust. The report's summary explained that from provider-patient relationships to payer interactions, trust has a cascading effect on people and the operational excellence achieved by the health organizations that excel in building trust. In today's transactional mindset, we can lose sight of the primary drivers of trust, providing or enabling access to expectations of care, facilitating understanding of coverage, and delivering diagnoses or treatment through experiences that humanize healthcare. Trust significantly influences people's behavior in terms of patient engagement, loyalty, and digital technology adoption. As leaders address workforce challenges and invest in new technologies, including telehealth and generative AI, it would be wise to place trust as the cornerstone of investment and outreach efforts, close quote. So let's tie together 2 of the highlights. First, a seamless and satisfying healthcare experience is more important to people than price. And second, highly digital people are the most likely to be loyal, find providers easy to work with, and trust them. Let's say that last one again. Highly digital people are the most likely to be loyal, find providers easy to work with, and trust them. Put another way, these should be cornerstones of any healthcare organization's growth strategy and the North Star for consumer experience. In fact, it shouldn't be a question anymore. Whenever anyone asks about the value of digital engagement, we should have the answers ready to go: loyalty, retention, and trust. That's the result of knowing what consumers want, then designing, building, and engaging them through those experiences. The roadmap's there for anyone who wants to listen, as Accenture's report will attest. The rest is up to us. Let's build the business case for digital engagement together and be ready to explain the value to anyone who asks. That's another way that we'll build to the healthcare of tomorrow, and that's the Flava of the week.
The flow.
All right, everyone, let's get into the flow. Can you please give it up for my guest this week? I'm so honored here to have Yuan Ling. Yuan, she goes by YY, and she's a partner at SignalFire. And really looking forward to this conversation because we're going to talk about the healthcare tech landscape at a pretty high level. And then we want to really drill down and zero in on a couple of things, particularly the current and future roadmap to using tech to improve legacy consumer experiences. So yeah, there's a lot packed in there, and that's on purpose. It's not an easy problem to solve, but thankfully we have people like YY working to solve it. So let's get going on this. So welcome to the Healthcare Wrap, YY.
Thank you, Jared. Appreciate you having me.
Going to give us the 2-minute version of who you are and where you're at and what you're all about. And I want to hear more about SignalFire and a couple of other things. But let's start with who you are.
No, absolutely. So I go by YY, literally like 2 Ys. Fun fact is that I am Canadian. I'm a partner at SignalFire focused on investing in early stage businesses at the intersection of healthcare and technology. I've been fortunate enough to be at the firm for 5 years, witnessing a tremendous amount of our growth as a firm, and also to be leading our health tech practice in the last couple of years and going forward. Outside of SignalFire, folks know me kind of as the chess whiz. So I grew up playing chess since the age of 7, and my father is my coach. I quickly fell in love with the game. I love all things puzzles, logic, quantitative analysis, planning ahead, etc. And quickly became the number 1 rated female chess player in Canada and the youngest ever women's international master in the country. And so there's a lot of correlations between chess and also investing. And then prior to SignalFire, I spent a number of years at Blackstone doing very late stage investing, but ultimately felt that at that stage of companies, there's really not too much you can really do to impact change. Companies are very mature. There are thousands of employees. And I always had that entrepreneurial kind of passion within me. So coming to SignalFire 5 years ago was really the best of both worlds. It was leveraging my skill set as an investor to a firm that was growing, but at the same time coming much, much earlier stage so I could actually roll up my sleeves and work with founders directly. And here we are. What
about SignalFire itself? Can you give us just a layperson's explanation? Where are some of the areas in particular in healthcare tech that you're focusing right now?
Yeah. So it'd be helpful in order to answer that question to understand who we are as a firm, because they're related. SignalFire started about a decade ago from our founding partners, Chris Farmer and Ilya Kurnos. And we built a firm on a very different first principle. So we thought about, if we were a company, who are we trying to serve as our customers and what is the pain point we're trying to solve? And for us, our customers are our founders. And we are trying to address their biggest pain points in scaling a business. So we did 500 interviews with early stage companies and asked them, what is that to you? And every time we got back, talent, recruiting the best people as quickly as possible as one of the top 3 answers. So SignalFire was built with that data-driven premise from day one, using data and product to support our founders in a scalable way, just like the companies we're investing in. It's somewhat crazy that investing in venture, though we invest in technology companies, we use very little technology ourselves. We're a very different VC firm. We have 10 engineers and data scientists in-house, full-time with us. We have a CTO. We have a product manager. We have a roadmap. And our platform is called Beacon. So Beacon ingests 500 million people on the talent side and 80 million companies on the company side. And then Beacon does a couple of things. So one, that's pretty cool. One, we do exactly what we heard from our founders, solving the recruiting problem using technology data. We do that by building our own proprietary talent rank. Every person on our data set has a talent rank on a scale of 1 to 100. So we're able to deem who is considered a top engineer by looking at people with 90th percentile talent rank and above. We're able to also build our own predictive analytics around who is most likely to leave their job, because we know from our data, something called poachability. We calculate poachability. We calculate how likely is someone to actually be interested in joining a Series B stage company versus only be at the Googles, the Metas of the world long term. And so Beacon is really a turbocharging recruiting platform we give for free to all of our portfolio companies, and we don't sell it or commercialize it. And then we also use Beacon to help us on the investment team track the best companies, to do all sorts of data science projects and so forth. So to answer your question about, what are we focused on at SignalFire? Hopefully you got a sense that we are a data native firm, an AI native firm ourselves, because this is something we've been built so ingrained into our DNA in the last 10 years, even before AI exploded 2 years ago. And so big data is part of our day to day. We pay a lot of money to AWS for the hosting costs. and also in purchasing data rights. And so for us and for me personally, I'm very excited about everything at intersection between healthcare, data, AI, and analytics. Healthcare data represents a third of the world's data. So you can just imagine the amount of vast applications, the infrastructure that need it, et cetera, in dealing with that. There's a lot to unpack there, but that's where I'm personally focused.
I love it. We're going to dig into that in a moment, but I'm personally curious, just with that background, what you might be reading right now, like what's interesting you at the moment?
If you ask this to 100 people, 99 of them will say AI. That is probably not a surprise. But for us, we take it a step further and we ask ourselves the question, what exactly in AI is going to be applicable to every vertical, and especially in healthcare, where it is highly regulated. I think for us, kind of some of the theses we have is that, we're seeing a lot of horizontal companies tackle kind of that infrastructure layer, the picks and shovels of AI enablement, kind of supporting those big LLM companies and what they're building. And we think that healthcare is one of those few verticals where a healthcare specific platform makes a lot of sense because of the regulations, because of the privacy concerns, because of the complexity of data and the extreme need to get things right. 80% is not good enough for this particular segment. And so we recently made a few investments and are some that are yet to be announced, but at the intersection between healthcare and AI, some at the infrastructure level, some at the kind of data level, and then some on the kind of application level as well, I can kind of talk about. But ultimately, if we look forward 10, 20 years from now, I absolutely do think that, the consumer behavior of searching on Google, I have, this and this, like, what does this mean for my health? Right? Everybody is kind of doing Dr. Google, but you never trust it because WebMD is not always correct. The Reddit forums is not always correct. And you go to your doctor, you don't necessarily trust that. You go to 3 different opinions. I absolutely think that sometime down the road, we're going to be in a world where we really start to trust that information that comes back to us. And we trust it like we trust our doctors. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to be so much more, I think, efficient with how we are able to receive care. And the hope is that the incumbents, the organizations in healthcare are also doing their part as well to make sure that healthcare is something that they can provide more proactively to us, not just sit there and wait for us patients to come to them when we need something. So I think those two things will converge. And the hope is this $4.3 trillion industry, which continues to rise year over year in per capita costs, will actually finally be contained or slowed in terms of its growth in spend.
Yeah, so that's tackling some of the legacy challenges that have always been there in healthcare. And I wonder about some particular parts of the landscape that may have changed over the last, say, 6 to 12 months. I'm curious what you've seen in healthcare tech in the last 6 to 12 months and what trends you're seeing today. How has the landscape changed?
There has been some significant change in how incumbents are reacting in the last, call it 12 months, due to 2 things. One is in a post-COVID era, I think incumbents, and I'm talking about, the hospital systems, the payers, folks are realizing that their own cost structures have only gone up because labor costs have only gone up. For health plans, premiums have continued to go up. And they realize in a post-COVID world that they're no longer able to sustain kind of their business models. A lot of them are losing money. These are nonprofits. They're not supposed to make money, but kind of being in the red is not where they want to be. There's a ton of change management. And so it's finally, I think, forcing adoption of all of these trends that we've talked about for the last decade. The consumerization of healthcare, the digitization of it, kind of mass adoption of telehealth, kind of the ideas of, using some sort of clinical decision support, for example, to really make your existing labor more effective and efficient. Like all of those things are now finally seeing strong signs of early adoption, not because our healthcare industry is suddenly becoming more innovative, but because I think that the incumbents finally face enough pain to need to make this transition. And then the second thing that's going on is just, of course, AI, right? Coming back to it, I know there's so much talk about it. Every single hospital leader is being asked, what is your AI strategy? What are you doing with AI? Every single chief innovation officer has a task of figuring that out. Some are further along than others. But when you put those things together, I think we're finally starting to see kind of that willingness to adopt, willingness to pay, willingness to pilot and experiment with things that were so far off the left field, probably even 5 years ago, you just wouldn't even consider it. We all remember the days of Watson Health, how that was once upon a time very exciting, but then it completely flopped. And now I think that the time has finally come where it's no longer about a single Watson Health, but there's many Watson Health being built right now, and some of them inside the institutions of these large incumbents themselves. The last thing I'll say is the incumbents they realize that they have an edge in this AI way because they sit on very valuable data. And if it's our view and thesis that the way to parse out signal from noise in any company building an intersection of AI and a certain vertical is if, one, they have proprietary data. And that's always the most important thing. Where did you get your model? Where did you get your training data to train your model? And what is the quality of that? How did you get it? What are the rights, etc.? And that is the biggest pot of gold that all the incumbents are sitting on. Like all of our patient data, clinical data, non-clinical data that's sitting inside the incumbents has been dormant and has been incredibly fragmented over the years. And so finally they're realizing, they have all this, which is effectively the gasoline to this wave of new cars, but they don't know what to do with it. So we're at this really interesting kind of second inning of this wave where people are starting to figure things out. There's some early adoption, early experiments, but a lot to do ahead of us.
I came across an interview you recently did with Espresso Capital, and you described how there's this huge opportunity right now in the intersection between data and healthcare. Can you tell us about what you're referring to? Like, what are some of those opportunities you're seeing, and what problems in particular are those addressing?
There's the way we segment, let's say, the AI application layer in healthcare is broadly, you can think of it as the clinical side and the non-clinical side. On the non-clinical side, that is where we're seeing the fastest adoption because the risk is lowest and the sell is the easiest. You're not replacing a human or doctor or nurse or whoever. You are augmenting them and you're taking away the 30% to 50% of their time spent on administrative work that they hated in the first place and not really got into this profession to actually do. No doctor gone into becoming a doctor to write the clinical notes every day. And so we're seeing a ton of companies grow, get funded, kind of announce partnerships with Epic, et cetera, in that non-clinical space. So some examples include front and center, the scribing companies, ambient scribing, doing automated dictation for the doctor during the visit and coming up with that clinical note, automatically. Saves, even if it's 10% of time for a doctor, it adds up and is massive. So there's a bunch of companies, probably everyone's familiar. Nuance has DAX, but then there's these privately funded companies like Abridge and like DeepScribe and Ambient and Freed and a long tail of many others. We have one in the SignalFire portfolio called HealthNote in particular. And so those companies are getting a lot of adoption in scribing. Then we see the other category that's seeing a lot of kind of adoption non-clinical is rev cycle management. For example, when it comes to post-visit, actual like documentation to coding to actually getting paid and managing denials, etc. Our technology, especially with now LLMs, are really, really good at doing this job, even better than humans because they're consistent. So our natural language processing technologies are able to take a doctor's note and say, which of these 300,000 CPT codes should I, ascribe to this with very high accuracy, giving on the specialty. So one of the companies that we've invested in is called Codemetrics, which does that exact thing. And there's many others kind of in that rev cycle kind of piece. So that's a non-clinical side. There's other buckets as well. There's just some examples. The flip side of non-clinical is clinical. What's particularly interesting to me is that going back to my earlier point about Watson and people's fear about things like Watson, we're finally starting to see adoption of these clinical decision support tools. We used to be, as an industry, extremely adverse to this because, this is a guild-oriented industry. Humans, we're part of labor unions. We don't like being replaced by technology. And for the first time, I'm seeing large hospital systems kind of build their own / pilot and partner with certain companies to do this, to give to their physicians to use. And I'm starting to see physicians actually use it and be happy about it. because they're realizing that, there was this famous article out there, the example about the radiologists. I don't know if you've seen this, the saying about how, AI is here not to replace radiologists, but the radiologists who do not adopt AI are certainly going to be kind of replaced by radiologists who do use AI. And so it's now these physicians, doctors are finding ways to make themselves more efficient, more competitive kind of in the market by some of these tools. And it's no different than over time, the skilled workers, right? The coders who are working, the engineers who are working at Google, 30% of their time, 50% of their time that used to go to writing code is now going to be replaced by GPT's capability. And so those who don't do that and don't weave those, technologies into their workflow are definitely not going to be able to keep up. So it's a very, very interesting paradigm shift. But again, I think on the clinical side, we're still super early. The non-clinical side, we're probably in that third, fourth inning, but there's still another 5, 6, 7, 8 more to go.
Right. Like I said, especially on the non-clinical side, what if we zero in on one part that we like to focus on the show anyway, which is the consumer experience side of it, which does feel like one that's been explored, but still relatively untapped compared to what's possible, I feel like. What are your thoughts on using healthcare tech to improve these legacy experiences for consumers? They've historically been filled with friction. What are your thoughts here?
I have always been a fan of One Medical's innovation here in making healthcare accessible, making it more consumer friendly. It always made extreme sense to me that healthcare should be no different than shopping in some degrees. There's something we want. We should have a singular place where we go and click a couple buttons and we should be able to get it, meaning an appointment. And it's crazy. You have to make these phone calls. You have to wait in line, sometimes for months on end, and then call, 3 different places to kind of get the care you do need. So I do think that finally, some of these trends are converging where I talked about incumbents having all this data and trying to figure out what to do with this. Combined with consumers now, because of One Medical has set the precedent, and some of them have felt like how easy it is to get a PCP appointment virtually, in person, etc. Have everything in a single app, all of your medical history, your notes, your payment, etc., your prescription, so forth, that those two things are, I think, finally coming together. I talked about earlier, incumbents are feeling the pressure to move because of pressures from their bottom line. They need to adopt and innovate. Otherwise, we're seeing a lot of companies, kind of third-party companies, kind of come and take market share, take their patients away from their ecosystem. So this intersection is very interesting where, I think Priya Health is a perfect example of this, where they are actually, the go-to-market is working with the incumbent, the hospitals, not alienating them, but partnering with them because they have all this data about all of us and patients. Who hasn't gone to a hospital, right? UCSF, Stanford, if you're in Boston, MGB, if you're in New York, Mount Sinai, we all have been at one of these places for one reason or another, and they have our data. And so being able to partner with them very closely, be aligned with them on what's top of mind for them, which is continue to grow their market share, retain their patients, and also continue to grow revenues by helping them build this infrastructure layer, taking all of this data, putting it into a single identity view, and then on the other side, doing what One Medical has done really well, creating that consumer-friendly app, which people love. It's super easy and accessible, no different than your Amazon shopping app or whatever app, and putting those two things together and helping incumbents have their own white-labeled app version. So my view is that consumer healthcare, like I said in the beginning, long-term, it is the healthcare ecosystem's job to be more proactive. And it's crazy to me that other industries have long figured this out. It's not an accident we get all the Instagram ads and the Facebook ads that are very targeted to us as if they're hearing our conversations. And that's because our consumer data, our purchase history is somewhere out in the wild, and somebody has bought that, synthesized it, figured out who we are as a consumer, and figured out how to target it. Healthcare has not done any of it, right? And I'm not saying we should push care to people that don't need it, but there is so much care gaps that we need to fill. And we keep talking about this, like filling care, how do we close the care gap? How do we close the care gap? This is win-win-win for everybody if we do this. yet there's so much friction. So finally, it feels like there's a moment in time now where we can create a win-win-win, empower the incumbents to leverage their data, give consumers that better experience and the care at the top of their fingertips, but also make it much more proactive and not have to wait until when they want something, but know, hey, you are due for your next annual visit, or hey, you're due for this. And I know, by the way, based on your behavior, that YY only likes to come in for appointments on Friday afternoon. So I should only show her Friday afternoon appointments. And YY does not like to take phone calls. She only responds to text messages. So I'm only going to, communicate with her via text. And so all of these things I think are interrelated, and it's a complex ecosystem, and it takes a company, with as grand of a vision, honestly, like Priya to potentially pull it off. But it is, I believe personally, the future of healthcare. And it's why SignalFire, we're very excited to be part of the financing, the recent round alongside First Cressy and some others.
How do we do that at scale? Any other thoughts on how do we, move the ball a little faster?
The reality of incumbents is that they move at their own pace. And I don't think that is going to change anytime soon. But in terms of how do we do this at scale, I think it really starts with how do you build a technology that is scalable, and how do you actually create as frictionless of a process in giving your technology to the incumbents? And so we typically know when you sell a piece of software to hospitals, the biggest piece of friction is often integration with whatever else piece of software that they're using, Epic and many others. And so this process could take a very, very long time. There could be roadblocks. Everybody has their own configuration of Epic as well. And so one thing that I think Priya's done a really great job of, to the team's credit, is, being very closely aligned with the existing major technology incumbents in healthcare, which I would put Epic in that bucket, Epic, Cerner, et cetera, and making sure it's a win for them as well. And so I think that's the fundamental in able to scale this. We have, as a firm, we've had this thesis for about 2 years, and we have looked at dozens of companies trying to solve this. We could not get there on any up until Priya, because majority of them were so narrow in scope and felt more like a point solution that latched onto something that had this exact problem of scalability. So I think because Priya was started within Providence, one of the top 10 systems out there in terms of patient volume and one of the top Epic shops, they had an inherent advantage in being able to do this in the right scalable way from day one, which I think is very, very difficult for others to replicate.
So the type of platform we're talking about here, I wonder if this is the same type of thing that we'll be talking about a year from now. I think you kind of answered this already a little bit, but is it the type of innovation that you expect to hear that we're talking about, say, this time next year?
I think so. I think it's that and more. I believe Amazon, given their acquisition of One Medical and PillPack, they're working on something consumer oriented, right? So who knows? Next thing you know, you open your Amazon shopping app and it's like, hey, do you also need to see your doctor? Supplements that may be good for you, right? I think it's everything we just talked about making this whole experience much more proactive. I find that, sometimes healthcare is extremely frustrating today to patient because we have to do so much to go get something which seems so fundamentally, essential. And I think it's frustrating because for us who are more tech savvy and we're much more curious, we would go do that research and we would get to the bottom of it. But for the majority of the population, I don't think they would. And so then it begs the question of, how much are we leaving on the table in terms of people's health? And the reality is there's a lot of fragments, I think, of healthcare in which we think, a simple Gen AI use case can be really meaningful. For example, we have invested in a company in the serious mental illness space called DoraMind. One of the things that is frequently a characteristic of patients with serious mental illness is the family members are very, very involved, not surprisingly. And the same parallels are drawn to, for example, maternity health, right? You have a newborn baby, you're very involved. You have so many more questions than you have answers to, similar to, the family of those who have serious mental illness. So having this kind of generative AI, maybe even like a chat bot or some sort of interaction where you're able to get your questions answered in a trustworthy way, And then on top of that, also just a companion to just talk to, because you're going through personally a lot as a mother, as the family of people who are struggling. It's almost that, the concept we've seen of these like AI therapists, like mental health therapists, but combined with a bit more of a medical database of actual like factual knowledge that they're sharing, I think is very, very powerful and can be, highly encouraging to families, because today, the way to do that is to call a doctor and talk to a doctor, and we just don't have the resources for all of the support. So I think it could really change the paradigm and the cost structures of, how not just the patient themselves get care, but also the secondary like support people in those people's lives, how they are supported by our healthcare ecosystem.
I want to thank you for your time here, but of course, I do have a chess question to ask you before we go here. What's the most frequent advice that you give to aspiring young chess players? They're on the up and up. What do you tell them?
I'll make this short. I tell them that chess is not difficult. It's all about pattern recognition. And I think a lot of people are spending their time training in the wrong way, or rather less effective way. So when you think about pattern recognition, if same thing to how engineers are training their GPT models, their LLM models today, in order for your model to recognize what is a cat, it's much more efficient to feed it 100 images of a cat and say this is cat, versus feed it 100 images of a zoo and tell it, here's 5 images of a cat, right? And so that analogy applies to chess, where, chess.com has become very popular. Everybody's on it. People love the puzzle training kind of module where you can go in and do a ton of puzzles. But doing a ton of puzzles in that format is like feeding your LLM model a zoo and hoping that it becomes amazing at identifying cat when it only sees 2 cats, right, or 5 cats. I think the more efficient way to get better at chess is to be very targeted. Chess is all about discrete patterns. There's called these tactics. So there's a fork, there's a pin, whatever. These are different combination names. But the idea is feed your own brain hundreds, thousands of the exact same pattern over and over again, and you will become flawless at identifying that in real life game before you move on to the next thing. So that's it. It's really, really that simple. It just does take the time and effort to kind of put in the work. But honestly, I think that as long as, from my perspective, the next generation or whoever finds enjoyment and joy in playing the game, I'm super happy that both COVID and Queen's Gambit has made chess more popular and cool again. So I'm just happy to kind of see that.
I love that. And it sounds like we have some work to do to take that advice to heart. So I want to thank you. That's a wrap for this episode. I've had the absolute pleasure of speaking with YY from SignalFire. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jared. This was fun.